Anna, you have no business vision. You're just a dreamer who got lucky with your grandmother's money. Those words shattered my heart as I stood in the kitchen of the restaurant I had made possible. The same restaurant that was now thriving, packed with customers every night, earning rave reviews from food critics. The restaurant my husband David was about to steal from me. I had sold my grandmother's house, the place where I'd spent every summer as a child, where she'd taught me to cook with love and patience, to fund his dream of opening an upscale Italian restaurant. For 2 years, I had worked alongside him, managing finances, designing the interior, even helping in the kitchen during busy nights. Now he stood there with his lawyer and his new girlfriend, the sous chef he'd been secretly seeing for months. "The restaurant is in my name," he continued coldly. "You have no legal claim to it. Pack your things and leave." I looked around the dining room I had designed, at the photos of my grandmother's recipes hanging on the walls, at the dream I had helped build with my inheritance and my heart. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone else's dream, only to be erased from the story, stay with me. When I inherited my grandmother's house 3 years ago, it felt like receiving a piece of heaven. The small Victorian cottage in the hills outside San Francisco had been in our family for 60 years. Nana had raised 5 children there, taught dozens of grandchildren to cook in its sunny kitchen, and filled every room with the warmth of unconditional love. The house was worth nearly $2 million due to its location and historical significance, but to me, it was priceless. It held every memory of my childhood summers, every lesson Nana had taught me about cooking, family, and finding joy in simple things. David knew how much the house meant to me. We had been married for 5 years, and he had spent countless weekends there with me, listening to my stories about Nana's legendary dinner parties, her secret recipes, her philosophy that food was love made visible. "Your grandmother was an amazing woman," he would say, watching me recreate her dishes in the same kitchen where she had taught me. "She would be so proud of how you've carried on her traditions." But David had his own dreams, and they were bigger than my quiet cottage and family recipes. He had been working as a line cook at various restaurants for 8 years, always talking about opening his own place, always frustrated by working for other people who didn't share his vision. "I want to create something special," he would tell me during our late-night conversations, "a restaurant that serves authentic Italian cuisine, not the Americanized versions you find everywhere. I want to honor the traditions, the techniques, the soul of Italian cooking." His passion was infectious, and I supported his dream completely. I helped him research locations, reviewed business plans, and even took cooking classes to better understand the industry he loved so much. When he talked about his restaurant, his eyes lit up in a way that made me fall in love with him all over again. The opportunity came when a prime location became available in North Beach, San Francisco's Little Italy. The space was perfect, a former restaurant with a full kitchen, dining room for 60 guests, and the kind of old-world charm that David envisioned for his concept. But the lease required a substantial deposit, plus funds for renovation, equipment, and operating capital. The total investment needed was nearly $1.8 million, money we didn't have. We could get investors, David suggested, but his previous attempts to secure backing had failed. Restaurant investors wanted experienced operators, proven track records, and guaranteed returns that David couldn't provide. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. "What if we sold Nana's house?" I suggested, one evening as we sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the recipes and memories that defined my childhood. David's eyes widened. "Anna, I can't ask you to do that. That house is your heritage, your connection to your grandmother." "But this restaurant is your dream," I replied. "And Nana always said that dreams were worth any sacrifice. She would understand." The decision wasn't easy. I spent weeks walking through every room of the house, touching the walls where family photos had hung, standing in the kitchen where Nana had taught me that cooking was an act of love. I grieved the loss even before it happened, but I also felt excited about the possibility of helping David achieve his dream. I imagined the restaurant filled with happy diners, David's face glowing with pride as critics praised his authentic Italian cuisine, the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. The sale process took 3 months. I insisted on finding buyers who would preserve the house's character, who understood its history and would treat it with respect. When I finally signed the papers and handed over the keys, I cried for hours. But David held me as I grieved, promising that we would build something even more beautiful together. "This restaurant will be our legacy," he said, "a place where we can honor your grandmother's memory by serving food made with the same love and passion she taught you." With the money from the sale, we secured the lease, hired contractors, and began the months-long process of creating David's vision. I threw myself into the project with the same dedication I had once reserved for preserving Nana's recipes. I managed the renovation, coordinating with contractors, designers, and city inspectors. I handled the financial planning, tracking every expense and ensuring we stayed within budget. I researched suppliers, negotiated contracts, and even helped design the menu layout and pricing strategy. David focused on the culinary aspects, developing recipes, training staff, and perfecting the techniques that would set our restaurant apart. But I was involved in every decision, every detail, every aspect of bringing his dream to life. We named the restaurant Nana's Table in honor of my grandmother, and I insisted on displaying some of her handwritten recipes on the walls. The dining room featured warm lighting, rustic wooden tables, and an open kitchen where David worked his magic. The opening was everything we had dreamed of. Food critics raved about the authentic flavors, the attention to detail, the passion evident in every dish. Within 6 months, we were booked solid every night, with a waiting list that stretched for weeks. I had never been happier. Watching David in his element, seeing diners' faces light up as they tasted his creations, knowing that I had helped make it all possible, it felt like the best investment I had ever made. But success changed David in ways I didn't expect. As the restaurant gained recognition, David began receiving offers from food magazines, cooking shows, and other restaurants wanting to hire him. His confidence grew, but so did his ego. He started talking about expanding, about opening multiple locations, about building a culinary empire. "We could franchise this concept," he would say, "take it national, maybe even international." I supported his ambitions, but I also urged caution. We had been successful for less than a year, and I wanted to ensure our foundation was solid before expanding. "Let's master this location first," I suggested. "Make sure our systems are perfect, our staff is fully trained, our finances are stable." But David saw my caution as lack of vision, my practical approach as limitation rather than wisdom. "You don't understand the restaurant business," he began saying during our planning meetings. "You're thinking too small, too conservatively." The criticism stung, especially since I had been managing the business side successfully for months. Our profit margins were healthy, our customer satisfaction scores were excellent, and our financial projections showed steady growth. But David was becoming increasingly dismissive of my contributions. He started making decisions without consulting me, hiring staff without my input, and talking about the restaurant as if it were his sole creation. "This is my restaurant," he said during one particularly heated discussion about expansion plans. "I'm the chef. I'm the creative force. You're just support staff." The words hit me like a physical blow. Support staff? I was the one who had made his dream possible, who had sacrificed my most precious possession to fund his vision, who had worked 18-hour days to ensure our success. But David no longer saw me as a partner. He saw me as an obstacle to his grander ambitions, a reminder of humble beginnings he wanted to leave behind. The final betrayal came when I discovered he had been meeting with investors behind my back, discussing expansion plans that didn't include me in any meaningful role. I need professional partners, he explained when I confronted him, people who understand the industry, who can help me take this to the next level. What about me? I asked. What about everything I've contributed? You've been helpful, he said dismissively, but this is bigger than what you can handle. This requires real business expertise. That night, I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened. The man I had loved, the dream I funded, the partnership I believed in, it was all slipping away from me. David no longer saw me as the one who had made his success possible. He saw me as deadweight, a liability to be discarded as he reached for bigger and better things. But I was about to discover that I was much more than he had ever given me credit for. The morning I discovered David's affair with our sous chef, Sophia, I felt like my entire world collapsed in the span of a heartbeat. I had arrived at the restaurant early to review our quarterly financial reports when I heard voices coming from the office. Through the slightly open door, I saw David and Sophia in an intimate embrace, whispering about their plans for the weekend. After we get rid of Anna, we can finally be together openly, Sophia was saying. The restaurant will be ours, and we can expand without her holding us back. She served her purpose, David replied, his voice cold and calculating. Her grandmother's money got us started, but now we need real partners, people who understand the business. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands shaking as I processed what I was hearing. The man I had loved and supported for 8 years, the man I had sacrificed my most precious inheritance for, was planning to discard me like yesterday's leftovers. I quietly backed away and left the restaurant, my mind reeling with shock and betrayal. The drive home was a blur of tears and disbelief. How long had this been going on? How many of our staff knew? How many of our friends and colleagues had been watching me play the fool while David built his new life with another woman? The next few days passed in a haze of numbness and practical necessities. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the devastating reality that my marriage and my business partnership were both illusions. David came home that evening acting as if nothing had happened, discussing the restaurant's busy weekend reservations and upcoming food critic review. I watched him lie to my face with such ease that I wondered how many other lies I had believed over the years. "You seem quiet tonight," he observed. "Everything okay?" I wanted to confront him, to scream about what I had witnessed, to demand explanations and apologies. But something held me back. Perhaps self-preservation, perhaps the need to understand the full scope of his betrayal before I acted. "Just tired," I said. "It's been a long week." Over the following days, I began paying closer attention to the dynamics at the restaurant. I noticed the way Sophia looked at David, the private conversations that stopped when I approached, the subtle signs of intimacy that I had been too trusting to recognize before. I also started reviewing out business documents more carefully. What I discovered made my blood run cold. David had been quietly transferring assets, changing vendor relationships, and restructuring contracts in ways that would make it easier to remove me from the business. The restaurant lease was in his name only, despite my providing all the initial capital. The business license listed him as sole proprietor. Even the bank accounts had been gradually shifted to his individual control rather than our joint ownership. I realized that David hadn't just been planning to leave me. He had been systematically erasing me from the business I had made possible. The legal consultation I sought was devastating. Because I had been naive enough to trust my husband completely, I had no legal claim to the restaurant despite funding its creation. The money from my grandmother's house had been given freely, with no formal partnership agreement or loan documentation. Unfortunately, generosity isn't legally binding, the attorney explained. Without proper documentation, your financial contribution is considered a gift. He owns the business and you have no recourse. The financial reality was even worse than the legal situation. Not only was I losing the restaurant, but I was also losing my primary source of income. I had been drawing a modest salary as the restaurant's general manager, but that would disappear along with my marriage. At 42 years old, I was facing the prospect of starting over with nothing, no business, no savings, no home of my own. The house David and I shared was his property, purchased before our marriage. Even my car was registered in his name for insurance purposes. The isolation was crushing. Most of our friends were connected to the restaurant industry, and I suspected many of them already knew about David's affair. I felt too humiliated to reach out to my family, too ashamed to admit that I had been so completely deceived and manipulated. I started spending long hours walking through the city, trying to process the magnitude of my losses. I had lost my grandmother's house, my marriage, my business, my financial security, and my sense of identity. Everything I had built my life around had been stripped away. The worst part was the silence at home. David continued his charade of normalcy, discussing restaurant business and future plans as if I would be part of them. Meanwhile, I knew he was planning my elimination from every aspect of the life we had supposedly built together. I felt like a ghost haunting my own existence, present but not really there, watching my life disintegrate while pretending everything was fine. The breaking point came 3 weeks after I had discovered the affair. David announced that he would be attending a restaurant industry conference in Los Angeles for the weekend, alone. "Sophia will handle the kitchen while I'm gone," he said casually. "She's really stepping up as a leader." I knew he wouldn't be alone, knew this was another romantic getaway disguised as business. But instead of confronting him, I used his absence to do something I should have done weeks earlier. I started planning my escape. I spent the weekend researching my options, contacting old friends, and beginning to formulate a plan for rebuilding my life. I also did something that surprised even me. I started cooking. For the first time since the restaurant opened, I returned to my grandmother's recipes, the ones that had been my comfort and inspiration long before David entered my life. I cooked her Sunday sauce, her handmade pasta, her secret recipe tiramisu. With each dish, I felt a connection to my roots, to the woman who had taught me that food was love made visible. As I cooked, I remembered something Nana had told me years before she died. "Ana mia cara, never let anyone convince you that your love is worthless. The people who don't appreciate what you give them don't deserve to receive it." Sitting in my kitchen that Sunday evening, surrounded by the aromas of my grandmother's recipes, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not beg David to stay, would not fight for a business that had been built on my sacrifice but registered in his name, would not try to compete with Sophia for a man who had already chosen to betray me. Instead, I would do something that would honor my grandmother's memory and prove my own worth. I would build something even better than what I was losing. The woman who had been dismissed as having no business vision was about to show everyone exactly what she was capable of when she stopped giving her power away to people who didn't deserve it. The morning David returned from his business conference in Los Angeles, I was sitting at our kitchen table with divorce papers and a carefully written letter. I had spent his entire absence making the most difficult but necessary decision of my life. I was going to let go of everything I thought I wanted in order to reclaim everything I actually needed. "Anna, we need to talk," David said as he walks through the door, his face serious and determined. He looked tanned and relaxed, clearly having enjoyed his romantic weekend with Sophia. "Yes, we do," I replied calmly, sliding the divorce papers across the table. "I know about Sophia. I know about your plans to remove me from the restaurant, and I know about the systematic way you've been erasing me from the business I made possible." His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally, cold calculation. "Anna, I can explain," I interrupted. "You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm walking away from the restaurant." "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice taking on a panicked edge. "You're part of this business. We built this together." "No, David. You built this with my money, my labor, and my trust. But you've made it clear that you don't want me as a partner, so I'm removing myself from the equation." I handed him the letter I had written, which formally resigned my position as general manager and relinquished any claim to the restaurant's operations. "I'm giving you exactly what you wanted: complete control of the business, freedom to expand with your new partners, and the ability to be with Sophia without any complications from me." He read the letter, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked almost like disappointment. "I don't understand. Why are you making this so easy?" "Because fighting you would be fighting for something that was never really mine to begin with," I said. "You've shown me that you see my contributions as worthless, my presence as an obstacle, and my love as something you can discard when it becomes inconvenient. I'm not going to waste my energy trying to convince you otherwise." The conversation that followed was surreal. David seemed almost upset that I wasn't fighting for him, wasn't begging him to reconsider, wasn't making the dramatic scene he had perhaps expected. Instead, I was calm, clear, and completely resolved in my decision to walk away. "What will you do?" he asked, and I heard something in his voice that might have been concern or might have been guilt. "I'm going to rebuild," I said simply. "I'm going to take everything I learned from this experience and use it to create something that belongs entirely to me." Over the next 2 weeks, I moved out of our shared home into a small apartment across town. I took only my personal belongings, my grandmother's recipes, and the knowledge I had gained from 2 years of running a successful restaurant. The divorce proceedings were straightforward since I wasn't contesting anything. David kept the house, the restaurant, and all the assets we had accumulated during our marriage. I walked away with my car, my personal savings account, and my freedom. Friends and family were shocked by my decision to give up so easily. "You should fight for what's yours," my sister urged. "You made that restaurant possible. You deserve half of everything." But I had come to understand something important during those weeks of reflection and planning. Fighting for a share of David's restaurant would mean staying connected to him, to Sophia, to a business that had been built on my sacrifice but would never truly be mine. It would mean years of legal battles, ongoing conflict, and constant reminders of my betrayal. Instead, I chose to let go completely. I signed away any claim to the restaurant, accepted a modest settlement that covered my immediate expenses, and focused on the future rather than the past. The decision to let go wasn't just about the restaurant or the marriage. It was about letting go of the version of myself that had been willing to sacrifice everything for someone else's dream. I had spent 8 years of my life making David's vision a reality, often at the expense of my own goals and interests. Now, for the first time since college, I was free to pursue my own dreams, to build something that reflected my values and vision, to create a legacy that honored my grandmother's memory in a way that truly mattered. I started by enrolling in culinary school. Despite having cooked alongside David for years and managing a successful restaurant, I realized I had never received formal training in the techniques and business practices that would allow me to succeed on my own. The decision to go back to school at 42 was intimidating, but it was also exhilarating. I was surrounded by passionate young chefs who reminded me why I had fallen in love with cooking in the first place. I rediscovered the joy of learning new techniques, experimenting with flavors, and creating dishes that told stories. My instructors were impressed by my practical experience and business knowledge. "You have an unusual combination of skills," Chef Martinez told me during a one-on-one evaluation. "Most culinary students understand food, but not business. Most business students understand numbers, but not the soul of cooking. You understand both." I threw myself into my studies with the same dedication I had once given to David's restaurant, but this time the effort was entirely for myself. I studied classical techniques, modern innovations, and business management. I learned about food costs, menu engineering, and restaurant operations from a chef's perspective rather than just a manager's. During my externship, I worked at 3 different restaurants, each teaching me something new about the industry. I learned about fine dining service, casual concept development, and the emerging farm-to-table movement that was reshaping American cuisine. But most importantly, I began developing my own culinary voice. Drawing on my grandmother's traditional recipes and the techniques I was learning in school, I started creating dishes that honored my heritage while incorporating modern sensibilities. I also started writing about food, contributing articles to local magazines about the intersection of tradition and innovation in cooking. My writing caught the attention of food critics and industry professionals who appreciated my unique perspective as someone who understood both the emotional and business sides of the restaurant world. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days when I missed the excitement of running a busy restaurant, when I wondered if I had made the right choice in walking away from everything I had built. There were moments when I saw reviews of Nana's Table and felt a pang of loss for the dream I had helped create but would never own. But those moments became less frequent as I built my new life. I was discovering that I was capable of much more than I had ever imagined when I was focused entirely on supporting someone else's vision. 18 months after walking away from David and the restaurant, I graduated from culinary school at the top of my class. I had job offers from several prestigious restaurants, but I had already decided on a different path. I was going to open my own place, not a restaurant, but something entirely new that reflected everything I had learned about food, business, and the power of authentic hospitality. The woman who had been told she had no business vision was about to prove that she had something even more valuable: the ability to create something meaningful from nothing, the courage to start over when everything fell apart, and the wisdom to build a foundation that no one could ever take away from her. 2 years after walking away from David and the restaurant I had helped create, I stood in the empty shell of what would become Nana's Kitchen. Not a traditional restaurant, but a culinary studio and event space that would honor my grandmother's memory while building something entirely my own. The space was perfect, a converted warehouse in the Mission District with soaring ceilings, exposed brick walls, and enough room for both a professional teaching kitchen and an intimate dining area. It was nothing like the polished elegance of the North Beach restaurant I had lost, but it felt like home in a way that place never had. The concept had evolved during my time in culinary school, inspired by my grandmother's philosophy that food was meant to bring people together, to teach and nurture, to create connections that lasted beyond a single meal. Instead of just serving dinner, I would offer cooking classes, private dining experiences, and catering services that focused on authentic Italian techniques and family recipes. The financial planning had been meticulous. I had saved every penny from my modest divorce settlement, worked part-time jobs during culinary school, and even sold some of my grandmother's jewelry to fund the initial investment. It wasn't nearly as much as I had put into David's restaurant, but it was entirely mine, earned through my own effort and sacrifice. I had also secured a small business loan, something I had never needed to do before. The process was humbling but educational. I had to present detailed business plans, financial projections, and marketing strategies to skeptical bank officers who questioned whether a middle-aged woman with no formal culinary credentials could succeed in such a competitive industry. The restaurant business has a very high failure rate, one loan officer warned me. What makes you think you can succeed where so many others have failed? Because I'm not trying to compete with other restaurants, I explained. I'm creating something different, a place where people come to learn, to connect, to experience food as culture and tradition rather than just consumption. The loan was approved, but barely, and with terms that required me to prove profitability within 18 months or face foreclosure. It was a risk that terrified and motivated me in equal measure. The renovation process was a labor of love that consumed 6 months of my life. I worked alongside contractors during the day and planned curriculum and menus late into the night. Every decision was mine to make, from the layout of the kitchen to the color of the walls to the style of tables and chairs. I chose warm, welcoming colors that reminded me of my grandmother's house, deep reds, golden yellows, and rich browns that made the space feel like an extension of a family kitchen. I hung enlarged photos of my grandmother cooking, along with her handwritten recipes in their original Italian, creating a gallery that told the story of our family's culinary heritage. The kitchen was designed for both functionality and visibility. Students would be able to see every technique, every step of the cooking process, while professional-grade equipment ensured that we could create restaurant-quality dishes. I invested in a wood-fired oven for authentic pizza and bread making, pasta machines for fresh noodle preparation, and a full range of modern appliances that would allow us to teach everything from basic knife skills to advanced sauce techniques. The most challenging aspect of the renovation was doing it all myself. Unlike the restaurant project with David, where I had managed contractors but relied on his vision and expertise, this time I was the sole decision maker, problem solver, and quality controller. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, but there were also moments of pure joy when I saw my vision taking shape exactly as I had imagined it. I hired my first employee 3 months before opening, Maria, a recent culinary school graduate who shared my passion for traditional Italian cooking and my belief that food education could change people's lives. She became not just my sous chef, but my partner in developing the curriculum and teaching methods that would set us apart from other cooking schools. This feels different from other places I've worked, Maria told me during our first week of menu development. It feels like we're building something that matters, not just trying to make money. She was right. Every decision we made was guided by the question of whether it would help our students develop a deeper understanding and appreciation of cooking, whether it would honor the traditions we were teaching, whether it would create the kind of warm, welcoming environment that my grandmother had always maintained in her kitchen. The class offerings we developed reflected my belief that cooking was about much more than following recipes. We offered Nana's Basics, which taught fundamental techniques through the lens of traditional Italian cooking. Sunday Sauce Secrets focused on the art of slow cooking and the patience required for truly exceptional flavors. Pasta from Scratch covered everything from mixing dough to shaping complex forms by hand. But we also offered classes that went beyond technique. Cooking for Healing explored the therapeutic aspects of food preparation. Family Feast Planning taught people how to create memorable gatherings, and Preserving Traditions helped families document and pass down their own culinary heritage. The private dining experiences were designed to be intimate and educational, with guests participating in the preparation of their meal while learning about the history and cultural significance of each dish. These events became some of our most popular offerings, attracting food lovers who wanted more than just a meal. They wanted an experience that connected them to the deeper meaning of Italian cuisine. The catering business focused on events where food was meant to bring people together: family reunions, wedding celebrations, corporate team building events. We didn't just provide meals, we provided experiences that honored the traditions and stories behind the food. Marketing was perhaps the biggest challenge since I had no experience in promoting a business and limited funds for advertising. I relied heavily on social media, sharing photos of our classes and events, posting videos of traditional techniques, and telling the stories behind our recipes. The response was overwhelming. Food bloggers discovered us and wrote enthusiastic reviews. Local newspapers featured articles about our unique approach to culinary education. Word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied students brought in new customers faster than we could accommodate them. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. I received a letter from a woman who had taken our Cooking for Healing class while going through chemotherapy. She wrote that learning to make simple, nourishing meals had given her a sense of control and purpose during the most difficult period of her life. Another student, a busy executive who had never cooked before, told me that our Nana's Basics class had transformed his relationship with food and helped him create new traditions with his own children. These stories reminded me why I had chosen this path, why I had walked away from the financial security of fighting for half of David's restaurant in order to build something entirely my own. 6 months after opening, we were booked solid for classes and private events. The catering business was growing steadily, and we had a waiting list for our most popular offerings. More importantly, we were profitable, not just covering expenses, but actually generating enough income to pay off the renovation loans and start building reserves for future expansion. The success felt different from what I had experienced with David's restaurant. This wasn't just about financial achievement or critical recognition. It was about creating something that mattered, something that honored my grandmother's legacy while building my own. I had proven to myself and to everyone who had doubted me that I did indeed have business vision, not the kind that focused solely on profit margins and expansion opportunities, but the kind that understood what people truly needed and found ways to provide it authentically and sustainably. The woman who had been dismissed as a dreamer who got lucky with her grandmother's money had built something that was entirely her own, something that no one could ever take away from her. 3 years after opening Nana's Kitchen, I stood in the main dining room of our expanded space, watching 30 students from around the world participating in our first annual Heritage Cooking Intensive, a week-long program that had become our signature offering. The woman who had once been told she had no business vision was now running a culinary education company that was booked solid for the next 18 months. The expansion had been organic and strategic. As word spread about our unique approach to food education, we began receiving requests for specialized programs, corporate workshops, and even consulting services for other culinary schools. The original warehouse space had grown to include 3 teaching kitchens, a retail area featuring imported Italian ingredients and handmade tools, and a small café where students could practice their skills while serving the public. My book, Nana's Wisdom: Traditional Techniques for Modern Kitchens, had been published 6 months earlier and was already in its 3rd printing. Food and Wine magazine had featured me on their cover as one of America's most innovative culinary educators, and I had been invited to speak at conferences around the world about the intersection of tradition and innovation in food education. But the recognition that meant the most to me came from my students, professional chefs who credited our programs with helping them rediscover their passion for cooking, home cooks who had gained the confidence to experiment with new techniques, and families who had used our classes to create new traditions and strengthen their connections to their heritage. The Heritage Cooking Intensive was the culmination of everything I had learned about the power of food to connect people to their roots and to each other. Students came from Italy, Mexico, India, Thailand, and dozens of other countries, each bringing their own family recipes and culinary traditions to share while learning techniques that could be applied across cultures. Food is the universal language, I told the opening session participants. When we cook together, when we share our family stories and traditional techniques, we discover that our differences are much smaller than our similarities. We all want to nourish the people we love, to preserve the wisdom of our ancestors, and to create memories that will last beyond our own lifetimes. The program had evolved from my own experience of losing and rediscovering my culinary heritage. I understood what it felt like to have your traditions dismissed as outdated, your knowledge undervalued because it came from grandmothers rather than culinary schools, your passion questioned because it wasn't focused solely on profit and expansion. Maria had become my business partner and co-director of education, bringing her own expertise in modern techniques and business development while sharing my commitment to honoring traditional methods. We had also hired 6 additional instructors, each specializing in different aspects of Italian cuisine and food culture. "You've created something really special here," Maria told me, as we watched students from 5 different countries collaborate on a traditional risotto while sharing stories about rice dishes from their own cultures. The financial success had exceeded all my projections. We were generating revenue from multiple streams: classes, private events, catering, retail sales, consulting, and now publishing. I had been able to pay off all my loans 2 years ahead of schedule and was building reserves for future expansion. But more importantly, I had achieved something I had never experienced during my marriage to David: complete autonomy over my work and my future. Every decision was mine to make. Every success was mine to claim. Every risk was mine to take. I had learned that there was a profound difference between building something with someone who saw you as an equal partner and building something with someone who saw you as a convenient resource. My personal life had also flourished in unexpected ways. I had been dating Marco, a food writer and cookbook author, for over a year. Our relationship was built on mutual respect for each other's work, shared values about the importance of culinary traditions, and a deep understanding of what it meant to rebuild your life after betrayal. Marco had been through his own difficult divorce from a woman who had never understood his passion for food writing and had constantly pressured him to pursue more practical career options. He understood what it meant to have your dreams dismissed by someone who was supposed to support them. "I love that you don't need me to validate your success," he told me one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. "You've built something amazing entirely on your own terms. That's incredibly attractive." Our relationship was everything my marriage to David hadn't been: supportive without being dependent, passionate without being controlling, committed without being controlling. We encouraged each other's individual pursuits while also finding ways to collaborate and support each other's goals. I had also reconnected with old friends and made many new ones through my work. The culinary community in San Francisco had embraced Nana's Kitchen as an important addition to the city's food scene, and I had been invited to join several professional organizations and advisory boards. The contrast with my previous life was stark. During my marriage to David, our social circle had been limited to his colleagues and friends from the restaurant industry, people who saw me primarily as David's wife rather than as an individual with my own interests and expertise. Now I was surrounded by people who valued my knowledge, sought my advice, and respected my achievements. The relationship with David had settled into complete indifference. I occasionally heard updates about the restaurant through mutual acquaintances. It was still successful, though not growing as rapidly as he had projected. He and Sophia had married, but I heard rumors that their relationship was strained by the pressures of running a business together. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, but I also felt no regret about walking away. The life I had built was so much richer and more fulfilling than anything I could have achieved by fighting for a share of something that had never truly been mine. The most meaningful recognition came when I was invited to speak at the International Association of Culinary Professionals conference about building authentic culinary businesses. My presentation focused on the importance of staying true to your values and vision, even when others pressure you to conform to conventional business models. Success isn't just about profit margins or expansion plans, I told the audience of culinary professionals. It's about creating something that matters, something that honors the traditions and values that inspired you to cook in the first place. When you build a business that reflects your authentic self, success becomes sustainable because it's not dependent on external validation or market trends. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails from chefs, restaurateurs, and food entrepreneurs who felt inspired to reassess their own businesses and priorities. Several asked me to consult with them on developing more authentic and sustainable business models. As I flew home from the conference, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. 4 years ago, I had been a woman who defined herself entirely through her relationship with a man who ultimately saw her as disposable. Today, I was a successful entrepreneur, educator, and author who had built something meaningful and lasting entirely on her own terms. The new beginning I had created wasn't just about professional success or financial independence, though those were important. It was about discovering who I was when I stopped trying to fit into someone else's vision of what I should be. When I stopped sacrificing my own dreams for someone else's ambitions. When I started building a life that honored my values and heritage. I had learned that I was capable of much more than I had ever imagined when I was focused entirely on supporting someone else's success. I had discovered that my grandmother's wisdom about food, family, and tradition was not outdated or irrelevant. It was the foundation for something beautiful and meaningful that could touch lives and preserve culture for future generations. The woman who had been told she had no business vision had created a business that was changing how people thought about food education and cultural preservation. The woman who had been dismissed as a dreamer had turned her dreams into a reality that exceeded anything she had lost. This was my new beginning, and it was more beautiful than anything I had ever imagined possible. 5 years after David had dismissed me as having no business vision, I was leaving a food industry conference in downtown San Francisco when I spotted a familiar figure sitting alone at the hotel bar. It took me a moment to recognize him. David looked older, more worn than I remembered, and there was something defeated in his posture that was completely unlike the confident man I had once known. I hesitated, debating whether to approach him or simply walk past. We had had no contact since our divorce was finalized, and I had built my new life without any reference or dependence on our shared past. But something about his demeanor, the slump of his shoulders, the way he stared into his drink, made me walk over to him. "David, are you okay?" He looked up, startled, and I saw that his eyes were bloodshot and tired. "Anna, I didn't know you were in town." "I was speaking at the culinary education conference," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "What brings you here?" His face darkened. "Bankruptcy lawyers. We're losing the restaurant." The words hit me with unexpected force. Whatever issues we had between us, I knew how much that restaurant had meant to him, how hard he had worked to build it into something special. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "What happened?" The story came out in broken pieces. After I left, David had expanded too quickly, opening 2 additional locations before the original restaurant had established a solid enough foundation. He had taken on investors who demanded rapid growth and high returns, compromising the quality and authenticity that had made the original location successful. "We lost our way," he admitted. "The investors wanted us to cut costs, standardize everything, turn it into a chain rather than a restaurant. We started using pre-made sauces, frozen ingredients, shortcuts that destroyed everything that made us special. Sophia," he told me, had left him 6 months earlier, not just as a business partner, but as a wife. She had taken a job as executive chef at a competing restaurant, and their divorce had been bitter and public, damaging the restaurant's reputation and morale. She said I was impossible to work with. that I had unrealistic expectations and no understanding of how to manage people, he said. She said I treated everyone around me like they were disposable. The irony wasn't lost on me. David, who had dismissed my contributions and discarded me when I became inconvenient, had been abandoned by the woman he had chosen over me for exactly the same reasons. The food critics have been brutal, he continued. They say we've lost our soul, that we're just another generic Italian chain trying to capitalize on our early success. Our reservations are down 60% from last year. I listened without judgment, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was sadness for the dream that had been corrupted, sympathy for his obvious pain, and a strange sense of vindication that the business built on my sacrifice had failed when it lost its authentic foundation. I keep thinking about the early days, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, when it was just you and me working 18-hour days, perfecting every recipe, caring about every detail. We had something special then. We did, I agreed, but you convinced yourself that what we had wasn't enough, that you needed something bigger and more impressive. I was an idiot, he said, tears forming in his eyes. I had everything I needed, a successful restaurant, a partner who understood the business, a woman who believed in my vision, and I threw it all away because I thought I deserved more. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between us. I could see the regret and self-awareness in his eyes, the painful recognition of how his choices had led to this moment. I heard about your success, he said finally. The cooking school, the book, the recognition. I'm proud of you, Anna. You built something amazing. Thank you, I said simply. I also heard that you're happy, that you found someone who appreciates what you bring to a relationship. I'm glad. You deserve that. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but what I saw was genuine remorse and acceptance. What will you do now? Start over, I guess. The lawyers say I might be able to keep the original location if I can restructure the debt and find new investors. But honestly, I don't know if I have the energy to rebuild. I don't know if I remember how to run a restaurant that's about food rather than just profit. You do remember, I said gently. You just lost sight of it for a while. The question is whether you're willing to go back to basics, to focus on what made you passionate about cooking in the first place. Would you, he started, then stopped himself. Never mind. I have no right to ask. What were you going to ask? I was going to ask if you would consider consulting with me, helping me figure out how to get back to what we had in the beginning. But I know that's not fair. I know I have no right to ask for your help after what I did to you. I considered his request carefully. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from any entanglement with the man who had caused me so much pain. But another part of me recognized an opportunity, not for reconciliation, but for the chance to help preserve something that had once been beautiful. I can't be your partner again, I said clearly. I can't be involved in the day-to-day operations or have any financial stake in the business. But I might be willing to do some limited consulting to help you rediscover the authentic vision that made the restaurant special in the first place. Why would you do that? He asked, clearly surprised. Because that restaurant was built on my grandmother's memory and my family's recipes, I said. If there's a chance to save it, to restore the authenticity and respect for tradition that it was supposed to represent, then I owe it to her legacy to try. Over the following months, I worked with David on a very limited basis, helping him strip away the corporate compromises and return to the artisanal approach that had made the restaurant successful. I helped him redesign the menu around authentic techniques and high-quality ingredients, retrain his staff in traditional methods, and reconnect with the local suppliers who had supported us in the early days. The process was challenging, but ultimately healing for both of us. David had to confront the ways his ego and ambition had corrupted his original vision, while I had to find ways to share my knowledge without compromising the boundaries I had established for my own protection. "I understand now why you walked away," he told me during one of our planning sessions. "You saw that I was more interested in being important than in being good at what I did. You knew that fighting for a piece of something that was already corrupted wouldn't give you what you really wanted." The restaurant's transformation was gradual but remarkable. As David returned to his roots as a chef rather than a businessman, the food improved dramatically. Critics began to notice the changes, and customers started returning. Within a year, the restaurant had regained much of its original reputation and financial stability. But the most important change was in David himself. He had learned humility, had rediscovered his passion for cooking rather than just succeeding, had developed a deeper appreciation for the people who supported his work. "I can never undo the damage I did to you, to us, to the dream we originally shared," he told me when our consulting relationship ended. "But I hope I can honor what you taught me by running this restaurant the way it was always meant to be run." I wished him well and meant it. The encounter had given me something I hadn't known I needed: the satisfaction of seeing authentic values triumph over corporate greed, the closure of knowing that my grandmother's recipes and traditions would be preserved and respected, and the confirmation that walking away had been the right choice. I had helped save something that mattered without sacrificing my own independence or integrity. I had shown compassion without compromising my boundaries. I had found a way to honor the past while protecting the future I had built. The encounter reminded me that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that you can wish someone well without welcoming them back into your life, and that sometimes the greatest victory is having the strength to help others succeed even when they once tried to diminish your worth. 7 years after David had told me I had no business vision, I stood in the kitchen of Nana's Kitchen, teaching a master class to 25 professional chefs from around the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had been dismissed as a dreamer was now considered an expert whose techniques and business philosophy were studied by culinary professionals globally. The class was part of our expanded Culinary Leadership Institute, a program I had developed to help experienced chefs transition from technical expertise to business ownership while maintaining their authentic vision and values. It had become one of our most sought-after offerings, with a waiting list that extended 18 months. "The biggest mistake I see in our industry," I told the assembled chefs, "is the belief that success requires compromising your values or abandoning the traditions that inspired you to cook in the first place. Authentic success comes from deepening your connection to what matters most, not from diluting it to appeal to the broadest possible market." The students hung on every word, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions about everything from menu development to staff management to maintaining quality during expansion. Many of them had heard my story, how I had lost everything by supporting someone else's vision, then built something even better by staying true to my own values. Among the students was Elena, a young chef from Barcelona who reminded me of myself at that age, passionate, talented, but uncertain about how to translate her culinary skills into business success. After the class, she approached me with a question that took me back to my own journey. "Chef Anna, how do you know when to fight for something and when to walk away?" she asked. I'm in a partnership that isn't working, but I'm afraid of starting over. I smiled, remembering the countless times I had asked myself the same question. You fight for things that align with your values and honor your authentic self, I said. You walk away from things that require you to compromise who you are or diminish what you believe in. The key is knowing the difference. The conversation reminded me of how far I had traveled, not just professionally, but personally. The woman who had once been afraid to leave an unfulfilling situation because she didn't believe in her own capabilities was now mentoring others to trust their instincts and pursue their authentic visions. My relationship with Marco had deepened into something beautiful and sustainable. We had married the previous year in a small ceremony held in the garden behind Nana's kitchen, surrounded by friends, family, and students who had become like family. Our partnership was everything my marriage to David hadn't been, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep appreciation for each other's individual strengths and dreams. Marco had become an integral part of the business, not as a co-owner, but as a collaborator who brought his expertise in food writing and media to help us reach a broader audience. His book about our teaching philosophy, The Authentic Kitchen: Lessons in Tradition and Innovation, had become a bestseller and brought international attention to our programs. "You've created something that goes beyond business success," he told me one evening as we reviewed applications for our scholarship program. "You've created a movement that's changing how people think about food, tradition, and authentic success." He was right. Nana's Kitchen had evolved into something much larger than a cooking school or event space. We had become a center for culinary cultural preservation, offering programs that helped families document and pass down their food traditions, workshops that connected immigrant communities with their heritage cuisines, and research initiatives that studied the role of food in maintaining cultural identity. The scholarship program was particularly meaningful to me. We provided full tuition for our programs to students who couldn't otherwise afford them. Young chefs from underserved communities, immigrants wanting to preserve their culinary traditions, and research initiatives that studied the role of food in maintaining cultural identity. One of our scholarship recipients, Maria Elena, had fled an abusive marriage with nothing but her grandmother's recipes and a determination to build a better life for her children. She had completed our Heritage Cooking Intensive and gone on to open a successful catering business specializing in authentic Mexican cuisine. "You didn't just teach me cooking techniques," she told me at our annual scholarship dinner. "You taught me that my knowledge has value, that my traditions matter, that I can build something meaningful from what I already know." These stories reminded me why I had chosen this path, why I had walked away from the financial security of fighting for half of David's restaurant in order to build something entirely my own. The relationship with David had settled into something I never expected, a cordial professional respect. His restaurant had not only survived, but thrived after returning to its authentic roots. He had learned to value tradition over trends, quality over quantity, and had become an advocate for the kind of authentic approach to Italian cuisine that I had always championed. He had remarried to a woman who shared his passion for food and understood the demands of the restaurant business. They had opened a small cooking school adjacent to the restaurant, focusing on traditional Italian techniques. It was successful in its own right, though much smaller in scope than what we had built at Nana's Kitchen. "I want you to know," he had told me during a chance encounter at a food industry event, "that everything I've learned about running an authentic business, I learned from watching you. You were always the one with real vision. I was just too arrogant to see it." His acknowledgement felt good, but it wasn't necessary for my peace of mind. I had long since stopped needing his validation to know my worth. The most profound change, however, was internal. I had developed an unshakable confidence in my own judgment, my own values, and my own capabilities. I no longer questioned whether I was smart enough, experienced enough, or visionary enough to succeed. I knew that I was all of those things and more. This confidence had been tested when a major culinary corporation approached me about franchising Nana's Kitchen, offering millions of dollars for the rights to replicate our concept nationwide. The offer was tempting. It would have provided financial security beyond anything I had ever imagined. But I turned it down without hesitation. This isn't about money, I explained to the executives who couldn't understand my decision. This is about preserving something authentic and meaningful. The moment we start mass producing what we do, we lose the very thing that makes it special. Instead, I chose to expand slowly and carefully, opening just 2 additional locations, one in New York and one in Los Angeles, each adapted to its local community while maintaining our core values and teaching philosophy. The decision to prioritize authenticity over profit had proven to be not just ethically right, but financially smart. Our programs commanded premium prices because students knew they were getting something unique and valuable. Our waiting lists grew longer, our reputation stronger, and our impact deeper. As I looked around the kitchen that evening, watching students from 6 different countries collaborate on traditional dishes while sharing stories about their own culinary heritage, I felt a profound sense of completion. I had come full circle, but to a much better place than where I had started. The woman who had been told she had no business vision had created a business that was changing lives and preserving cultures. The woman who had been dismissed as a dreamer had turned her dreams into a reality that exceeded anything she had lost. I had learned that success wasn't about building the biggest business or making the most money. It was about creating something that mattered, something that honored your values and contributed to the world in a meaningful way. The circle was complete, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I write these final words, 10 years have passed since the day David told me I had no business vision and erased me from the restaurant I had made possible. I am now 52 years old, and I can say with absolute certainty that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. Nana's Kitchen has become more than I ever dared to imagine. We now operate in 4 cities, have graduated over 3,000 students, and have been featured in documentaries about the preservation of culinary traditions. My 3rd book, Building Authentic Success: Lessons from the Kitchen, has become required reading in business schools that focus on sustainable entrepreneurship. But the numbers and accolades, while gratifying, aren't what matter most. What matters is the letter I received last week from a former student who wrote that our program had given her the confidence to leave an abusive marriage and start her own catering business. What matters is the family that traveled from Italy to take our heritage cooking intensive because they wanted to reconnect with traditions their grandparents had brought to America. What matters is the young chef who told me that our philosophy had helped him choose authenticity over profit when he opened his own restaurant. Marco and I celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary last month. Our marriage continues to be everything my first marriage wasn't: a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that love means supporting each other's individual growth rather than trying to control or diminish it. We have also become parents through adoption, welcoming Sophia, a 7-year-old girl whose birth parents couldn't care for her. Watching her discover the joy of cooking, seeing her face light up when she successfully makes pasta from scratch, reminds me daily of why preserving culinary traditions matters. It's about passing on not just techniques, but values, culture, and the understanding that food is love made visible. David and I crossed paths again recently at a food industry conference where we were both speaking. He about the importance of returning to authentic techniques, me about building sustainable culinary businesses. Our conversation was brief but cordial, and I was struck by how completely I had moved beyond any lingering resentment or regret. "I hope you know," he said as we parted, "that watching you succeed has taught me more about real leadership than any business book ever could. You showed me what it looks like to build something meaningful rather than just profitable." His words were kind, but I no longer needed his acknowledgement to know my worth. I had learned that external validation, while nice, was never necessary for internal peace and confidence. To every woman who has been told her dreams are unrealistic, her vision too small, her contributions unimportant, I want you to know that their inability to see your worth says nothing about your value and everything about their limitations. To every person who has sacrificed everything for someone else's success only to be discarded when you were no longer useful, I want you to know that your generosity was not wasted, even if it wasn't appreciated. The capacity to give freely is a strength, not a weakness, and the right people will treasure what you offer. To every entrepreneur who has been pressured to compromise their values for profit, to scale quickly at the expense of quality, to choose growth over authenticity, I want you to know that there is another way. Success built on your authentic values is not only possible, but more sustainable and fulfilling than success built on someone else's definition of what matters. The journey from betrayal to triumph, from dismissal to recognition, from dependence to independence is not easy. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when the voices of those who diminished you echo in your mind, when the safe path seems more appealing than the authentic one. But I promise you this, if you have the courage to build something that reflects your true values, if you refuse to let others define your worth, if you choose authenticity over approval, you will discover capabilities and strengths you never knew you possessed. You will find that you are more resilient than you imagined, more creative than you believed, more deserving of success and happiness than you were taught to think. You will discover that the person who emerges from the ashes of betrayal is often stronger, wiser, and more authentic than the person who was destroyed. I am not the same woman who stood in that restaurant kitchen 10 years ago, listening to her husband dismiss her contributions and erase her from their shared dream. That woman was defined by other people's approval, other people's vision, other people's definition of success. The woman I am today knows that real success comes from staying true to your values, even when others pressure you to compromise. I know that authentic relationships are built on mutual respect and support, not on one person's willingness to sacrifice everything for the other's benefit. I know that my grandmother's wisdom about food, family, and tradition wasn't outdated, it was timeless. Most importantly, I have learned that being dismissed by someone who couldn't see your value is not a reflection of your worth. It's an opportunity to find people who can appreciate what you offer and to build something that truly matters. The woman who was told she had no business vision built a business that is changing how people think about food, tradition, and authentic success. The woman who was called a dreamer turned her dreams into a reality that has touched thousands of lives and preserved cultural traditions for future generations. If my story has inspired you, if it has given you courage to pursue your own authentic path, if it has reminded you that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to appreciate it, then every moment of pain and struggle was worthwhile. Your story is not over. Your greatest achievements may still be ahead of you. The dreams that others have dismissed as unrealistic may be exactly what the world needs. Trust your vision, honor your values, build something that matters, and remember, you have always had everything you need to succeed. You just needed to stop giving your power away to people who couldn't see your worth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing in the power of authenticity, resilience, and the courage to start over when necessary. Now, go build something beautiful. The world is waiting for what only you can create.